Hello heathens of YouTube, once again this is Mishka Valhalla. I hope you enjoyed my last video and I hope you are all surviving quarantine so far. I'm sure you all know that the giants and the Jotuns are a very controversial subject, but the controversies don't end because our next video is going to be about the serpents and the dragons. And many of you know that the serpent and the dragon do have a lot of controversial topics within Norse mythology, and their roles tend to kind of differ compared to what we have, written in the sources, and compared to what we know spiritually about, the mentality of the people back then. So that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to get into the Anglo-Saxons, the Norse people, the Germanic people, behind the history of dragons and serpents, and we're going to talk about their spiritual meaning. I will draw parallels from other cultures, but we're mainly going to focus on the topic of Norse and Germanic dragons and serpents. So without any further ado, let's begin. So, dragons in a Norse-Germanic context. So when you think about European dragons or Western dragons in general, you think of a fire-breathing, scaly beast that resembles, like a demon of some sort, like something that comes from hell, just something evil. But I have to say that is definitely a lot of Christian influence. And, you'll hear me say that a lot, but while learning about heathenry and learning about our roots, it is very important to separate, things that are, more natural, heathen-like, and things that are, more sky-based, more Christian, more, ethereal per se, but, less, world-accepting. And so what you'll notice, throughout Europe, throughout the different tales, there's all these different dragons, but all of them are being slain. Typically, they're guarding gold. Typically this gold is magical or sacred, and that alone shows some clues of the nature of a dragon and why, they're always hiding in the earth or like underground or like in a cave or inside a mountain. They aren't like living in the heavens, in most European tales, they aren't like coming from a high off place, from a far off land, like in, they're described in more Eastern cultures. That's where we start talking about dragons that are, untaintedly talked about, as wholesome, luck-giving beings. They're wise and powerful. And through a lot of cultures besides, the Western world, dragons are written about in a very positive light, a very sacred light. And what's interesting though is, sure, you can read the European stories about dragons, but when you look at the archaeology, it tells a completely different story. You see plenty of dragon motifs, you see serpents interwoven and stone artwork. Now we're going, back to our main focus, Northern Europe. You see all these different serpents woven together through knotwork and various designs, etched into gold, brooches, amulets, big rune stones, all these different, dragon designs are all over. The dragon-headed ships, for example, those are used to intimidate their enemies. And, why have a dragon-headed ship if they're evil, Like, why, have so many serpents and dragons, decorated around your whole society if they're bad? Like, there are many tales, even in Norse traditions, in Old English traditions, Anglo-Saxon traditions, Germanic traditions, many accounts of where dragons were violent, they caused trouble, they stole livestock, they burned towns, they fought kings and knights, blah blah blah. But going further back, when you start looking at the archaeology and the hidden meanings behind the different dragons, you start to see all the different extra stories that aren't very heavily analyzed. So first off, you have, going back, I'm guessing this story was probably, it took place maybe around the migration era. It was from, obviously like well before the Viking Age, a couple centuries. And it was focusing on the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain. So in the Historia Britannium, it's basically read that there was this king, Vortigern. What was his name? Yeah, Vortigern. He was a Welsh king, and when the Anglo-Saxons, now that's another thing, they say the Anglo-Saxons invaded, but many Anglo-Saxons were hired by Britannic kings, Romanized Britannic kings during the migration era. They hired Saxons to fight for them. And Hengist and Horsa, leaders, bearing the pale horse, and pale will go into, an interesting detail about the Saxons and dragons here pretty soon. But Vortigern was trying to build, his own fortress, but the fortress walls overnight kept falling over, and he wasn't sure what happened. So he decided to, I think it was, receive, he asked his guards to find a boy who, was orphaned, didn't have any parents, and he wanted to sacrifice the boy so that the walls would stop falling down. So before Vortigern sacrifices the boy, apparently he finds out that there are two dragons under the hill that he's building his fortress that are fighting, a red dragon and a white dragon. And that's interesting because, I mentioned the pale horse. The pale dragon was said to, in the story, was said to represent the Saxons. And that's interesting, these stories take place during Saxon times, pagan times, while the Britons, were usually the more Christianized, Celtic type people, due to the Roman invasion. There was a lot of Roman influence earlier on, so in a way there was layers. First it was the Saxons conquering the Britons, the Romans conquering the Britons, then the Saxons conquering the Roman Britons, and then the Danes and the Northmen attacking the Saxons and the Angles and so on. But that was after the migration era. But during the migration era where this story takes place, the white dragon symbolizes the Saxons, and the red one symbolizes the Britons or the Welsh. And that's interesting because that's probably why the Welsh flag has a red dragon, because during this story, Vortigern, the dragon representing his people, was the red dragon. And so in the story, apparently the red dragon kills the white dragon, and apparently that gives Wales or whatever, his land, peace. It allows, and it makes it so that the Saxons can't further invade his land or something like that. And so the story goes, apparently the boy that was going to be sacrificed apparently turned out to be young Merlin. And that's interesting because that would lead into later Arthurian stories, and those were Britannic in origin, older than the Saxons, because in the stories of Arthurius, he was said to be like a Britannic Roman general who fought the Saxons and essentially drove them out, even though he didn't truly drive them out, because, well, the Anglo-Saxons stayed, obviously, and they stayed long enough that, other Germanic tribes had to conquer them, in order for things to change eventually. But, anyway, besides the point. The dragons have a lot of deeper symbolism, in my opinion. This isn't the first time that a red dragon and a white dragon appear in an old Britannic story. There's another medieval romance, and it's called Lud and Leifelis. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Lud and Leifelis. And it's essentially a story about two dragons, a white dragon and a red dragon, fighting so loudly and so fiercely that it causes a plague and causes trouble, and their shrieks are heard all over Britain. And so apparently, the people of Britain try to do something about it, and so what they do is they put like a big, bale full of mead in like this pit, and what they do, and that's interesting, because the mead, being a sacred drink, they're implying that the dragons themselves would also want to partake in that. And so essentially the story goes is they're trying to lure the fighting dragons into this pit. And the two dragons are fighting and turning into different animals, and then eventually they turn into pigs, and then that's when eventually they are lured into the pit where they start drinking the mead, and then they pass out. And so apparently the cave or the hole or the pit collapses on them or covers them or hides them or something. So basically they're just sleeping under there, after drinking all that mead. So it's interesting. I mean, obviously that's a shortened version of the story, but it's just funny, because they talk about dragons so much, and there are stories, plenty of stories where they're violent and problematic. But then again, you go back to the old, pagan designs and artwork and runestones, and you also analyze the stories and the etymology, and you start to notice that all these different dragons, representing people, kind of like house totems, or crests. The dragon, is an empowering symbol, like a totem, something that represents a tribe or a clan, and it seems to, be something that shows itself, throughout Norse and Germanic culture. The the Brittonic influence, because it was, Christianized, and including, the Saxons that, still had hold of these texts, they had been converted to Christianity. So who knows how much of these texts and these stories are affected by Christianity. So we never truly know the full truth. But from my own opinion and my own analyzation of it, I'd say that these dragons, this red and this white dragon, all the symbolism, the etymology, such as like Jormungandr, Jormungand's name being like earthly spellcaster or something like that, just draws so many sacred meanings to it. And the red and the white dragon seems to draw back to much older traditions, similar to that of having like a totem animal for a tribe, like a wolf or a bear, but maybe some people have a serpent or a dragon. It doesn't seem unusual at all, especially since there are plenty of, archaeological examples of dragons being a prominent figurehead in Germanic society. So, the dragon could have very well been seen, as like a sacred animal, just like any other animal, by the ancient Germanic or Norse people. But, obviously we do need to, separate everything, the heathen things from the Christian things, and understand really what the difference is. And sometimes that can be hard, especially since nowadays our society is very heavily indoctrinated. So that definitely means that, we have already forgotten so much, and it's going to be really hard for us to, in a way, reset our brains, to the way things were before. I'm sure many of you heard about the Norse dragon Fafnir. So it was a dwarf who turned into a dragon, and that's interesting because you already in the sagas and in the mythology see plenty of stories of people turning into animals, turning into creatures, changing form, changing their hamr, and hamr being their appearance or their self, a part of their self. But typically that would be expressed, from what we know through shamanic journey. And so by doing that, maybe some people, took the form of a dragon, which could have been their fylgja or their totem. The dragons were said to, live in underground, maybe even certain burial mounds or just mounds themselves. There were different areas in England even named after dragons. The Anglo-Saxons gave place names like Dragli, meaning dragon mound, and in Lancashire, they named a place called Drakalo. In Derbyshire also shows this. But yes, back to the dragon Fafnir. So yes, the dwarf turned into the dragon, and then Sigurd, very popular hero in Norse myth, he slayed the dragon, and after he slayed the dragon, the heart was cooked, and when he tasted the blood, Sigurd could understand the speech of birds, and that's interesting. Why would a dragon's blood give one the speech, the speech of birds, to understand birds, or a gift for that matter? If it's not a sacred animal, if it's not, if it's so evil, why does it benefit Sigurd just because he drank its blood? I don't know. It's interesting, like there's so many layers to it, and it's hard to tell what is Christianized and what isn't, especially since, I do believe the fact that I'm not saying that there were no bad dragons in ancient European lore. I'm not saying there were no evil serpents, but I'm sure there were plenty, but it's more of a gray area, just like the Jotuns, and I feel like over time, as Christianity took hold, plenty of things were demonized, even the earth itself, animals, beasts, things considered ungodly, even though God created everything, there was still a heavy emphasis on demonizing things that were natural, and that obviously brings more emphasis on the whole, world-denying views of, many monotheistic religions. And when it comes to like physical, like actual living dragons in Midgard, I don't believe that's a thing. I mean, if it ever did happen, it probably was, like thousands of years ago, like our ancestors probably killed them off, maybe due to the fact that, people just, wanted to gain fame from it. They wanted to make a sacrifice to the gods, or maybe, with all the Christianized stories, many of them were killed off, during crusades. Who really knows? Like obviously there isn't really physical evidence out there for like a dragon per se. Obviously we do have dinosaur fossils, but that can totally be a different story, absolutely. But the way I view dragons in a Norse pagan context is more of a spiritual thing, more of a totem-like thing. I do believe that if dragons were ever around, they're all dead, typically. They're in the underworld, and that's why in the stories, I believe, they talk about the dragons living in hills and mounds and underground, just like the dead do in the underworld. So it's just kind of like, why not think of it that way? Especially since, dragons throughout the world have been described as very elemental beings, and Jormungandr and many other serpents seem to have a very like earth-based qualities, very fertility-based qualities. So maybe the dragon to ancient Nordic people, was, like a fertility symbol, just like the serpent or a snake, just like the reptile, like the reptilian, the reptilian beast, was a sacred state of being or consciousness to maybe our ancient ancestors. But obviously, this is just my own research, and a lot of these could very well just be my own opinions. But I hope many of you are still following along and are bearing with me. Anyway, that pretty much sums up what I want to share right now about my thoughts on dragons and serpents. But I wanted to end this video with just a shout out to some of these cool artifacts I purchased online. Nothing ancient or not really replicas or anything, but I got these two products from this really cool website called Sons of Vikings. They have really good jewelry. I don't know if I showed you this pendant, since we're on the subject of dragons. So this is my dragon pendant, and I wear it around my neck sometimes. And then of course I wear this in my hair with the rest of my period clothing, my Norse gown, or whatever you could call it, pinned for the hair. Another dragon. So yeah, check them out. Sons of Vikings or Grimfrost. They have a lot of good products. But yeah, another dragon I wanted to mention from Norse mythology is Nidhogg. Nidhogg being an insult in Old Norse. But the dragon itself, its role is quite docile in my opinion. Not very evil per se. They say that the corpse in the pro set, it says that the corpse chews on the wicked, and I think it mentions that in the Poetic Edda as well, but you know, with the dragon, you know, that alone doesn't really sound like a bad thing. You know, chewing bad people doesn't really sound that bad, but I mean, you know, but at the same time, his role was much more deep than that. You know, he lives in the underworld. You know, in the roots of Yggdrasil. They say he chews at the roots, but in the Poetic Edda it talks about, you know, him like eating away the corpses. You know, and in a way it kind of reminds me of like a natural process. You know, how if the dragons are very earthly entities, you know, maybe by them eating the corpses, they're decomposing the corpse. That is a very you know, plausible idea. But you know, other than that, after Ragnarok, it's also said that, you know, he will resurface from the underworld. Nidhogg will resurface from the underworld, and he will release all of the corpses back onto Midgard. So it's interesting, you know, in a way, it's like saying, you know, when the new world is reborn, our spirits once again will be able to have our bodies, or something like that. I mean, it doesn't say that, but maybe it implies that. You know, I mean, why else would, you know, Nidhogg just come out from the underworld, fly above, drop the corpses back on, you know, and then just leave, you know, drop the corpses back on Midgard, and then just sink back into the underworld. You know, sounds like a much deeper meaning than just being creepy and weird. You know, I'm sure that that's what maybe Snorri was thinking when he was writing the Poetic Edda, or many Christians while they were reading it was you know, like, oh, you know, it's Norse mythology, you know, it's the old heathen ways, you know, creepy dragon dropping corpses everywhere, you know. I mean, you know, if you know Nidhogg's role, it would make sense, you know. I mean, the idea when we die is we don't need our body anymore, typically, you know, and so if our body is in the earth rotting away, maybe it's Nidhogg rotting it away for us, you know, maybe. But yeah, like, you know, he's a dragon, you know, and he's in the earth, and you know, he doesn't really do many bad things at all. Like, they do say he chews away at the roots of Yggdrasil, but in a way, it's like, you know, it's the Yggdrasil is doomed anyway. The whole cosmos is doomed anyway, and all these different gods and beings are just playing their role, you know, to keep things orderly. You know, especially the Aesir and Vanir, they're trying to keep things stable, but they know deep down, you know, that the Jotuns in the end will go to war with the Aesir and Vanir. You know, the purely chaotic beings will go to war with the mainly orderly beings, you know, and then they'll clash and essentially destroy the cosmos. And then that's when the next cosmos is going to be reborn. Is when the Earth rises back from the Earth, or the Earth rises back from the ocean, and you know, it's green again. Everything is fine again. You know, a new tree is born. New humans, you know, come out from hiding inside the tree. You know, there's just, you know, this return, and during that return, Nidhogg plays an important role. One thing I'll also mention with the importance of Jormungandr is, you know, why does he have to, like, why is he so important that he has to hold his tail in his mouth, you know, for the worlds to not flood? You know, that sounds like an important role to me. You know, just how Mani, a Jotun, you know, can haul the moon, or Sunna, also a Jotun, can haul the sun. Jormungandr being a serpent, a sacred serpent, an earthly serpent, holding his tail in his mouth so that things don't go crazy, you know, so that the world doesn't flood, sounds like an important role to me. And I don't know, it's a heavy topic. Like I said, there are so many, you know, interesting things hidden. One last thing I'll mention before I end this video is, I know it doesn't really have much to do with, you know, the Norse people or the Germanic people, or even, you know, during the times of when they were conquering Ireland, you know, well before that, but, you know, during the times of St. Patrick, it was said that he drove out the snakes, and of course the snakes being the pagans, or the Celts. The Celtic pagans are the Druids. You know, during this time, St. Patrick was trying to convert the Emerald Isle, you know, Ireland. He was trying to convert all of Ireland to Irish Catholicism. So, you know, obviously there was a lot of protest to that, but, you know, he succeeded to drive out all the snakes. Snakes being, you know, the serpents, people who value the cult of the serpent, the cult of the reptile, maybe even the dragon, who knows, but it's interesting, because all animals have their cults, but it didn't seem until later on that many animals, especially certain animals, were demonized, just based on how they look and how they were used in the past. Obviously twisting their original meanings, but we're still on that quest to really discovering the truth. It'll still be pretty hard to discover that, no matter what. And at the end of the day, we will never fully know the absolute truth, and I think it takes a really mature person to recognize that we'll never truly know. But we can do our best, to try. But anyway, without any further ado, that's the end of my video. Please like and subscribe. Please comment if you would like any suggestions for future videos. If you want to make any comments about any dragons or serpents, be much appreciated. Very welcomed. Excuse me. Please like and subscribe. Have a nice day and good luck, everybody. Hail to the gods, and thank you.